Hello, welcome to the Philosophy, Science, and Religion podcast. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with Slattery and our first-time guest, Daniel. And Daniel, I don't know if you'd want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself since you're new to this podcast.
I guess so. So my name is Daniel Decastro. I'm actually a graduate from Columbia University. I have a master's in education, special education. From Columbia. I also have a master's in music composition from NYU. I actually am a certified educator. My stepfather is a PhD in philosophy from Milan University. I'm published online as a video game music professional. If you go on www.vgmusic.com, you can find my master's thesis. It's titled Considering the Standards, the Quality Video Game Scores, Considering the Standards Set and Personal Reflections, a study that involved trying to introduce ways of introducing the merits of video game music to academia. It was essential in pushing into academia awareness of video game scores, its complexity, and its, effectiveness in, conveying emotional qualities in video game scores and enhancing the quality of video games, making it more of an art. What else? I have many years under my belt as one of the InfidelGuy.com community members, personal, friend of Reginald Finley, so I'm familiar with, many debates on topics such as this. And I happen to be a formal anti-natalist myself. I'm an atheist, determinist, humanist, big fan of Sam Harris, and Dan Dennett, the big three, Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens. I work at PC Richard & Son full time, and I teach part time in a school here in New York City. That's pretty much a little bit about myself.
Well, that sounds like a lot, Daniel, and that's really cool about the video game music, because I'll tell you what, video game music is most of what I listen to. I love my video games.
Cool. Awesome. Good.
Yeah. So, one question I had for you, Daniel, is I'm actually curious as to what it is you disagreed with about the anti-natalism philosophy, since you say you're a former anti-natalist.
Yeah. So essentially, I mean, you want to introduce Trick next, or I'll answer that question, but I don't know. Do you want to introduce Trick?
Yeah. Why don't we? Because we have a lot to get into on that topic. So why don't we? You just introduce me real quick? I'll just introduce myself. I'm Trick Slattery. Anyone who's listened to this podcast has probably heard of me. I've written a book on breaking the free will illusion. So I'm not a determinist. I'm a hard incompatibilist, but it's similar to determinist. It's pretty much the same thing. Me and Daniel both have that in common, and that's kind of, I kind of want to focus on that a little bit before we start the argument, because I want to suggest that anytime we talk about ethics or morality or anything like that, what we're really doing is we're talking about a forward-looking ethic of a causal variety. We're never backward blaming. So if I'm saying that something is unethical, I'm not trying to point fingers at something that someone has already done. So when because this topic is going to be about anti-natalism specifically, that's an ethical position that I take there. So I just want to make that clear. So I think it'll be interesting once me and him kind of get into some of the details of anti-natalism and what he disagrees with exactly.
All right.
So why don't you start, Daniel? What
okay,
is your...
Sure. So
yeah.
my quip with anti-natalism essentially is I think it's a subjective position. That's number one. Number two, I think it's a position born of a really too high an expectation of humanity's plight. I think that, and I understand because I was once an anti-natalist, and we discussed this in the past, and I would tell you, that I did at one point think that it was unethical to obviously, bring a child into the world, considering how chaotic and how, terrible the world is. How can you raise a kid in such a, chaotic landscape, when you have so much war going on, famine, the risk of getting diseases, cancer, pollution, just so many things that would definitely lend itself to questioning, just how ethical are you if you're bringing a child into this world in such conditions. And, I kind of realized that, I kind of, a lot of what kind of prompted me to move away from anti-natalism, one of the main things is I was setting the bar too high for my fellow human beings. So what I mean by that was that I kind of I was, I guess, more of a perfectionist. Like I expected a lot from people and they just were falling short. And I had a very deficit-based perspective of individuals in general. To my surprise, I encountered, I guess from that, a lot of criticism of determinists in general from, the highest tiers of my studies in academia. There was a lot of anti-determinist sentiment. And, and during my studies, of course, I encountered these sentiments, and it kind of made me really reflect on what was going on based on what my critics were telling me about determinism, and it kind of did supplement that doubt that I had in myself. Like, okay, so we have obviously people are capable of some great evil. Obviously, I'm bringing in a child into the world among men and women of great evil, and that's not good. But that's eventually I realized, nobody's perfect. Everyone makes mistakes, and you know what? I really can't say that. That wasn't born of that sentiment definitely influenced me. It pretty much pushed me to say, there's no room for these people to get any better. They're done. They're set in their ways. There's no chance that they'll ever be able to change. So screw it all. Why should I have a child in a world like this? But then I kind of went back and reflected often and would say, I'm pushing it too far. I'm really putting myself on a spot that's too high, because I don't even know what the end result of something that's supposed to be perfect really is. What is a perfect society really? What evidence do I have, or what example do I have of what constitutes a perfect society, such that I ought to imagine that as something that could be possible, to the point where, if we can't achieve this perfect society, we're better off just not reproducing, just pretty much letting ourselves die off. I had no real evidence of that. And a lot of what prompted me to feel that way initially was just my lack of confidence in humanity, I had no sense of competence in humanity. And as a result, I chose that position. It kind of, broke away once I realized that I was really setting the bar a little too high. I was becoming more of a perfectionist, and I kind of lost myself in that. And I realized, I'm not perfect. I learned to accept those imperfections in both myself and in others, and live with it, and at least try my best to do whatever I can to enjoy my life, given those limits. And that's where I turned to music and art and video games and stupid things like that, and just being with people, talking to people, and just getting to know people. Eventually, when you put aside these topics of politics and philosophy and religion, you end up seeing a different side of people that get maybe a little bit more hopeful at the time. You meet enough people, you get out of that shell, that box that, especially the one that I was in. I was in such a bubble that I'd never really had. I was not really a social creature for many years because of my atheism. Obviously, I was very limited with whom I could be friends with. So my world was very dark and dreary, very pessimistic, very, non-optimistic at all. I mean, that kind of lent itself to, again, me being very anti-natalist and just to myself. I was like a little cat, I couldn't be part of a herd. But that changed.
Would it be safe to say that you're against anti-natalism, or you're not for anti-natalism because you have this idea that antinatalism is this dark, dreary state of mind? Is that your position?
That's part of it, I guess. That's one reason that I would say I'm no longer an antinatalist. Yeah, absolutely. That's it feels like, I see people and the happiness that a child may bring to them. Yes, while it may be selfish, and that's definitely a valid point that antinatalists make, everybody is to some degree selfish. I really don't believe that there's any such thing as altruism, and I think this is also something that came to mind at the time when I was an anti-natalist. I actually used to think the same way. I used to be like, you know what, everybody, this is a very selfish position. I don't, it's a very inconsiderate one, and I don't think it's ethical. And but I changed that because I realized that just the idea of wanting to do good, wanting to do, avoid harm or eliminate the chance that there could be any sort of pain or suffering, is a selfish desire. It's born of good intent, but it's still selfish. So I notice oftentimes a lot of people that argue for anti-natalism make the claim that it's a selfish and unethical thing, but I challenge that because the very fact that you're doing good and you're avoiding harm is in fact a selfish desire also, because you don't want any harm to come to you if you can help it, and you don't want to impose any harm on anybody else if you can help it either, for that very reason of self-preservation. That's a selfish act.
So you would say that not wanting to impose harm on somebody else is a selfish act? Absolutely.
Okay. Because you know that at the end, if you create a world where you influence people not to create harm on others, it's for self-preservation ultimately.
What if you do?
Otherwise, why not? Otherwise, why not just kill yourself? Then that's the main reason. That I was like, that's where, and I was like, whoa. When I kind of just came to that to me naturally. That's where I was like, whoa, yeah, why not just kill myself? Something is driving me to want to survive. There's so many events in my life that lead me to want to stay alive. You don't just stop wanting to survive. And upon exploring those gut reasons why, you might want to stay alive, you end up finding these things out about yourself.
Let's say that you can prevent suffering from something, from another person, but your prevention of that suffering doesn't really influence the way it wouldn't really influence your own life. Let's say they're on the other end of the world, for example. Would you say that is just as selfish of an act?
Ure, absolutely.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with it. It's just still selfish, but it's good. It's still good. It's still ethical.
It's selfish in the sense that you're invoking something that you care about, right? You care about the suffering of others.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So I think I could agree with you on this idea that what we do for selfish reasons a lot of the time.
Right. I would argue all the time.
Well, but there's also the question of whether something is ethical or unethical. Do you agree with this, or are you a?
Yeah, but yes. Now, with respect to ethics, you have to kind of ask yourself the question, which I did: is there such thing as a perfect ethics, and what does that look like? What does that consist of? And really, should we be trying to achieve a perfect ethic in an imperfect world?
Well, can we? I agree with you. There's no such thing as a perfect ethic. Like no person is ethically perfect. That's an impossibility.
Right.
But would you agree with me that it is better to attempt to be ethical when possible?
Absolutely. Sure.
Okay. So when we're talking about this anti-natalist position, what the anti-natalist is saying is, if somebody is thinking about having a child or procreating, they should think about the ethics of it. They should look at the ethics and say, why is it ethical to actually do what I want to do here, to produce this new being and bring them into the world, right?
Certainly.
So,
right.
Okay. So regardless of whether that's selfish or not, we can still assess whether there's an ethical problem with that.
Right.
Okay. So that's what I want to talk to you about.
Great.
So I want to start with, are you familiar with the asymmetry argument?
Yeah. If you tell it to me, I'm sure I'll know it. I've come across so many different types of arguments, but go ahead. You can say the piece.
It's pretty simple. So for the asymmetry argument, you have basically an asymmetry between existence and non-existence. So for existence, for example, it's important that someone in existence obtains joy or pleasure or all the good experiences. it's important to them because they're in existence and they could be deprived of that pleasure and pain, or pleasure and goodness and joy and all that stuff.
Sure.
Same thing with pain. For pain, right. It's important that we prevent that, right?
Sure, I agree.
We try to prevent or try to avoid the suffering. Okay. Well, when you were talking about from a state that no one is in existence yet, prior to procreation, there's nothing that wants, desires, or needs any of those good things, any of the joy, the positives. So it's not of value to something that's not in existence yet. There's no valuer in existence. So that's kind of the asymmetry. But the difference is when it comes to the negatives, the suffering and the pain, it's still important that we prevent that from coming into existence, because it's a difference between prevention of value and creation of value.
Now that's where I wanted to kind of step in and say, that upon observing human, I guess, behavior and history, oftentimes many great things come of pain and suffering, because oftentimes pain and suffering motivates us to seek ways to further minimize pain and suffering. It may be a necessary consequence of the chaotic state of the universe, and that's something that, again, we don't really have much evidence to go on. But go on.
So once in existence, once we're here in existence, you're right. A lot of times we have to endure the negatives to get to the positives, and the positives are important to get to. Mm-hmm. But prior to existence, that enduration doesn't need to take place, because there's nothing there's no valuer there yet. There's no valuer that could be deprived of the positive. So there's nothing that have to endure the negative to get to the positive.
Right, and I think the last time we spoke, and I think I know where this is going. Last time I spoke to you, we discussed the fact that life came to being for reasons that were beyond our control, and we had left off on the idea that ultimately the best solution is to have a giant robot scouring the cosmos, where there would be potential life, and doing everything in that robot's power to prevent life from sprouting. And this is one of the reasons why I really can't fully accept your position beyond anything but faith, okay? Because there's no real evidence that the universe wouldn't go through a big crunch and a big bang over and over and over again, generating the same conditions for life over and over and over again, such that robot's efforts would have been completely in vain, which is why I don't,
Hold on a second. Okay, so that's another top. I mean, there's a whole lot to this anti-natalist topic.
Right,
we could talk about life on other planets and things like that. The fact of the matter is, when two people have decided to have a child, they're making a decision for that child. Basically, they're saying, I'm making this decision, and this is all beyond the whole idea of the whole human race non-procreating out of existence and things like that.
Right.
We could talk about that as well, because that's kind of where I would agree with you. If, for example, the entire human population today decided instantly that they should all non-procreate out of existence, that they shouldn't have any more kids,
I think it would be a futile exercise. That's my argument too.
Even if it took place, I agree with you. It's probably not going to happen. But if it took place, I think it would be ethically problematic, because that would just allow the evolutionary history of the Earth to just keep going, and it would just cause more harm in the long run.
Listen, if the universe wishes to understand itself through our consciousness, in such a state that it has to bear the trials and tribulations of everyday, problems, then so be it. We can't control that. That's my point. That was my point when we first spoke.
We do make decisions. So when we're making ethical decisions, when we're making decisions to harm something or not harm something, and we can think about these decisions and causally make a decision between options.
Mm-hmm. We'd have no choice but to make those decisions anyway, because And they happen to be in a world such that it happens to, our decisions can't be perfect because the world that we're in is not perfect.
Right, but we could still assess if we have the variables, the causal variables. We could still assess between certain options. I can assess that kicking a puppy would hurt that puppy, right?
Right, and I wouldn't want to do that.
You wouldn't want to do that, right? But if you did, you could say that deterministically that was in the cards, but you could still say that it's something that if you're trying to make a decision, you're going to make the decision not to do that.
Sure.
So same thing with this. With this.
I mean, do you think that somebody do you think a baby coming into the world can necessarily be like kicking a puppy in the stomach? That's,
I think that when you bring somebody into the world, they will always have to endure some sort of suffering or pain or harm.
Right.
I don't think there's any person on the planet that hasn't endured some kind of suffering, pain.
Right. Sure. Right.
Now it might be minimal for some people. You might be lucky enough to have something that's minimal there. But that leads us to another argument, which is called the risk argument. Basically, you're taking a gamble with somebody else's welfare.
Right.
So when we talk about gambling, if I took your money and I gambled with it, that would be an ethical issue.
Right. That's why I wanted to get an abortion. That's why I had an abortion happen, for that very reason. That was one of the reasons why I chose not to have a kid. This one that I have now is not my first one. The first one I had to get an abortion because of that very ethical consideration between the two parties involved.
Okay. Yeah. So, but I'm talking about anytime two people decide to procreate, they're taking a gamble. They're gambling, and they're not gambling with their own welfare. They're gambling with somebody else's welfare. So obviously, like you said in the beginning, the child can get cancer later on. They could even hate their entire life. You never know how that will turn out.
Sure, it is a gamble.
Right, but it's a gamble with so there's two arguments there. You have the asymmetry argument, which says that it can never be really for the sake of the child. Bringing a child into existence, you can't.
No, there's multiple things involved. No, you can't. I agree. You can't say it's just for the sake of the child. When you have a kid, at least for me, after having gone through that, it definitely wasn't a thought that it's just for the sake of the child to bring a child into the world. Not just.
I'm saying it can't be for the sake of the child.
Right.
Like
it's not.
That is a consideration that isn't part of the equation of
correct.
Right. Okay. So you understand that. So it can't be for the sake of the child, and you're gambling on the welfare of that child.
Absolutely.
The child can't consent, so there's the consent argument that you're imposing on something that can't consent.
That's true.
So that's the third argument. And then we get into the state of the world as it exists today, which has an overpopulation, which has when somebody lives in a first world country, they're already imposing on people in third world countries without even knowing it via slave labor and all these other factors. So they're causing harm that way. So by you bringing in another child, you're causing that harm as well.
Right, about 50% of the time, the potential is there for that at this point. Sure, because you can be very lucky, and the opposite could happen. You could be bringing a child into a very blissful world with good parents, good resources, good environment. That could also very well be the case, and it's definitely something I consider.
But I'm saying, if you bring, even if your child is, say you bring a child that is lucky throughout their entire life, they happen to have a good life, as good as you can get on Earth.
Right.
That child is still imposing on other creatures on this planet because of resource consumption. So you have the the environmental issue. So anyone in first world country is a killing the environment. You have. I mean, if you ever look at your ecological footprint, you know that you probably have like 30 slave labor people working for you without you realizing it, just by having, by living in a house.
Right, of course, right. We haven't achieved the situation right now is definitely not an ideal one, but it's not to say that we couldn't work towards a situation that addresses all of the ethical concerns you have with the world that the child is born into. Absolutely. Right. That's my argument, is that I think that I totally agree with what you're saying. There's no disagreement there that the world is a problem right now. But the thing is, how are we going to work towards a solution to these problems if we give up on them, if we give up on what is the cause of the problem? That's essentially what I feel an anti-natalist is doing, as I felt I did when I was once the anti-natalist that I was. That's why I said from the beginning, that I had too high an expectation. Right. Which is great. These expectations, these are obviously, what you're telling me now is a sign that you have very good expectations, or high expectations. You have good intent because you recognize the problems without a doubt. Right. As do I. The only difference is I don't give up on those problems and say, you know what, I think it's better if I just don't have any kids, because, these problems will definitely be a conundrum ethically. And that's not something that I adhere to. So
allow me to clarify something here, because
sure. Maybe I'm mistaken, but
no. I understand where you're coming from, and it's a position that it's totally understandable what you're saying there. But the issue is, and some antinatalists, you're right. Some antinatalists do this. They say antinatalism is a solution, and that's it. But that isn't antinatalism, period. And that is a sect of antinatalists that say that. For example, I'm a transhumanist, trans-consciousness. I think that we should be working towards other goals alongside of antinatalism to fix these problems. Because I don't think that antinatalism, non-procreation out of existence, will probably come to fruition. I don't think that that's something that's going to necessarily happen.
Okay, so are you saying that maybe antinatalism applied in certain aspects of, like, for example, maybe as a means of encouraging control of population growth in, say, China or something like that?
Oh, well, just of the earth. I mean, for example, there's so many people right now that can adopt.
No offense to any Chinese people. I'm sorry. It's not what I meant. It's just, I'm just giving an example because I know that they suffer from an overpopulation issue, but because of SARS and stuff like that. But go on.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So there, I mean, just take adoption, for example. Adoption would be a good thing. You could adopt, and you can still say you want to educate a child or things like that. That's all doable without creating one yourself, at least currently. Now, if like I said, if everybody decided to not procreate out of existence, that would be a problem, because there would be a problem with the rest of the earth, because we haven't solved the problem with, for example, the harms in the wild. But that's not going to happen. That's very unlikely, and you have to look at your current situation that you're in right now, at being a citizen in a first world country with overpopulation, with all these aspects that I mentioned: the asymmetry, the risk argument, the consent argument, the environment argument. These are all problems that you can't just overlook when you're making that important decision.
Sure. Yeah. No. And you know what? I totally embrace those problems, because and the way that I do it, the way that I reconcile that, is essentially having understood that the world is the way it is. It's not perfect, and that's those things you've listed to me, those arguments you've listed, are all forms of imperfections that we have to grapple with as we, navigate this life. And it's something that I've come to grips with and said to myself, listen, I can't sit here and get scholastic on myself about every single little mistake that I make. I have to embrace that I'm going to inevitably make some of those mistakes, that I'm going to inevitably make some of those unethical choices for the sake of the hope of good down the road. And it's sort of like saying, you know what? I mean, I may have to take out bin Laden. Okay, I may have to assassinate him, even though that's not what I really want to do. But for the greater good, I'm going to have to kill the guy. But we know that killing is not ethical. So unfortunately, though, that's the way the world works. And you can't change that right away. It takes time. And, right now, the choice for me to have a kid is just that. It's an acceptance that I've made some ethical unethical choices, obviously, but for the greater good at the end of the road, because I'm going to train my kid to be a good person, to contribute to society as best I can, impart on him my knowledge, my ethics that will hopefully, and that includes obviously determinist ethics and determinism and atheism or whatever he decides to be. I don't even care if he believes in God. So long as he's a determinist, I'm happy with that. Right. I would hate for him to start saying things like, oh, you know what, this guy's at fault for everything he does. No, like my wife, she's a Catholic, okay, and I'm an atheist, but she operates like a determinist, which is very interesting. So long as the dogma is not in there in his child rearing and all that is good, then I can have confidence in my ability to procreate, but to do it in a way that's effective in the spirit of producing ethical, conditions down the road, better conditions for everybody down the road. That's all.
So I want to, So you've already had a kid, and
right.
that's something that already happened, and as I said in the beginning, we don't have free will. Once it already happens, it happened, and but what I'm saying that even if you have a kid, it's not inconsistent to be an anti-natalist. An anti-natalist. So, for example, Jim Crawford, he had a kid, and he's currently an anti-natalist.
Okay.
Because he understands. So he says, "I'm not going to have any more kids."
Oh, okay.
So it's
that's
about
reasonable.
So it's about understand. Like I said, it's about causal ethics leading to future outcomes. We're not in the backward blaming variety of ethics here when we don't have free will.
Okay.
So I just want to make that perfectly clear.
No, it seemed totally different initially. I kind of didn't get that impression from the way that you guys had been talking about. I mean, I guess more specifically, I'd say Chandler was more. I mean, he's obviously asexual. So
Chandler,
from what I understand,
Chandler's that, and he's anti-sex, basically.
Right, which is his thing. I mean, that's totally. He has that neurological makeup that leads him to obviously be the way he is, and I'm not knocking that. I think the aspect that I'm knocking in what a lot of what he says, or I haven't, I guess I'm getting a better understanding of your own position, but his positions, I have a couple of issues with when he says things like, you know what, I mean, you're unethical. It's unethical to have children, and while it's drawing a very, I think it's dangerous in the sense that it draws a negative picture of those who have children, and I don't think that's what he ought to be doing. I think you have a more reasonable way of presenting the whole anti-natalist thing, because to me, the way you're describing anti-natalism it's a facet of thought you can apply when the time is right. Just like you just gave in your example. I mean, that's very reasonable and logical. I would subscribe to that.
I think if Chandler was pressed, he would say the same thing that I'm saying right now. But I just maybe he hasn't mentioned it the way I mentioned it. But yes, right. like I said, there's anti-natalists that have had children.
Right.
So it's a position about future. It's a future future concerns. People understand that they make mistakes or they don't even consider them a mistake. Really, it's really that was the causality at that time. But they've changed their position based on certain factors, and those are the factors that I'm kind of bringing up when we're talking about antinatalism. Is those, especially like. David Benatar has the asymmetry argument. That's kind of a strong argument that says that you can never have the child for the sake of the child.
Right.
There might be some other consequentialist.
Listen, that's definitely a consciousness raising idea because yes, I think people are generally not aware of these things. They generally don't give these things thought when they're about to have a child. And I think that Benatar, what he says is definitely sound advice. It's just not everyone thinks like a philosopher, though. And that's the thing, is that for a layman, the message that he's espousing doesn't resonate very well if it's taken at face value. But if you dig a little deeper, it actually does give some, it just works or serves to give some sort of awareness, that something we should be aware of ourselves so we don't overstep our bounds. When, going about having a child. You know,
I kind of share some of your feelings about certain people that share the anti-natalist position. Sometimes they could be overly pessimistic.
Right.
They're a lot of times emotionally driven rather than logically driven. So it's the same thing with any field, right? So you have atheists that some are rational atheists and others, they're more emotional, and so you have that in every field.
You have atheists that are compatibilists.
Yes. They're atheists that are compatibilists.
My favorite oxymoron. Okay, no problem.
Yeah, that's just a definitional thing that people play with, but they avoid certain other topics when they do that. But I think this discussion was good because I think we kind of made a connection between our two disagreements.
Right, like if you choose not to have any kids, I don't hold it against you at all. It's that's your choice, that's your decision, and that's a noble thing. You may not think that you know exactly what it's going to take to really create a child that's going to be an effective advocate for change. You may take a humble position and say, you know what, I'd rather just contribute to the population control thing and not have a kid, period. And that's noble of you. I respect that. And you have a very, I don't know if that's what you think. I'm just saying that's something that I would not have an issue with.
My main concern is that people think about this topic before they have it. So I don't want this topic to just go into obscurity. I want people to actually think about this topic. If they ultimately decide against it, that's just the way causality flowed for their mindset. But I want people. I don't want this. I want people to understand what antinatalism is, not necessarily pin it, pigeonhole it into some dark cesspool of pessimistic thought.
Right. That's right. That's really, I think, a risk factor. I mean, and you know what? I get it, and you're right. And with respect to that, and I respect that. I totally agree that it's not a terrible idea. It's not, I think that though there can be an extreme form of that idea, and that's what I have an issue with. I think if the idea in itself takes a more moderate, outlook, I think like the one we're kind of, I would assume we're kind of exploring right now, that's something I feel comfortable with. I don't have an issue with it because I actually don't want to have another kid, but my wife wants to have another kid.
Right.
And, now I'm torn between making her happy and being, true to my beliefs about, having a kid at this point in time, considering the fact that my child was born with autism, and I don't want to risk having another child with autism because it's fiscally very, very difficult. But it's been so far very socially rewarding because you see that people come out and they start to explore the differences, and we need to understand. And my son kind of gives people gives me an opportunity to discuss with other people the differences that are out there in human beings, the differences in brain structure or thought or thinking, the neurotypical versus the autistic. This is a nice discourse or dialogue to have. It's very healthy. It's important because it gives people awareness of how different we are and that we're not perfect and great. So I think that it's been good, but I think one is enough.
Yeah. Well. And I'm not like as an anti-natalist, I'm not saying that some kid is going to make you miserable. I'm saying that a lot of times they make your life happier. They give you a lot of joy. You get to teach a child and all this other stuff, but you have to take into the other ethical considerations and understand that it can never really be for the sake of that child. And you run a really great risk when you play a gamble with somebody else's welfare. So it's right.
No, I just like it if somebody wouldn't throw me into this seemingly evil pile of people if I have a kid. That was my main concern with the way that certain anti-natalists express themselves, and I think you're aware of that, and that's
some
good.
Anti-natalists, even believe in free will. So I'm as a free will skeptic. I don't, that it's a different mindset, right?
Right.
It's not about ethics. Can never be about backward blaming. It can never be about pointing fingers. It can be about pointing things out and saying, we need to change these type of things. We need to change our mindsets and hopefully adjust it for future outcomes. But it's never about backward blaming, you for having a kid. That's not what it's about.
Right. Okay. Right. No, but just as a aside, I think to kind of avoid this negative outlook on the views and to create better PR, I think that we got to be careful how we bring up this issue. Maybe more as a consciousness aware raising idea, just to put it out there, because it's a good idea. It's definitely something people ought to think about before they have a kid. Most definitely, I agree, and it's because it's a big responsibility. It's a big thing, and I think that it's important to have that discussion about antinatalism as a positive, and I'm totally for that. I'm totally for this, talking about these 4 arguments you brought up and making people aware of them so that before they make that choice, they have a more mature understanding, I think, of what they're getting themselves into. And
that's really all I could ask. All I could ask is that people think about the arguments. They don't just reject them because why don't you just go kill yourself then, or some other
exactly right
ad hom fallacy or anything like that. They just they look at the arguments and they make their decision based. That's all that can be asked for.
Right.
Okay, so I think this was a good conversation. I don't think it went hostile or anything like that. I thought it was cool.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree. And, I thank the audience for listening. And I'm definitely, it's 45 minutes in. I think I'm all right. I kind of get a better understanding as to the community's sentiments on this matter. And I don't feel like a black sheep. I shouldn't have a reason to feel like a black sheep. That's good. That was my main concern is initially when I'm seeing Chandler posting these, pages long, I guess, expressions of his feelings on the matter. And I get it, Len. I'm like, wow, I'm like, gee, this guy really, he seems like a good kid, but wow, there's a lot of stuff he's saying that's rubbing me the wrong way. So I gotta,
a lot of times it's about frustrations with the world and things like that. So
right, absolutely, and I totally get it. And you know what? If Chandler's listening to this, I totally get what you feel. But I have to fight a battle in academia to defend determinists, and it doesn't help me.
Hey there, Daniel.
It doesn't help me when hey Chandler, it doesn't help me when you're saying these things, and it doesn't help my agenda, because what happens is it feeds them more fuel. It lends itself to their correctness about how deficit-based determinists are, and that's something that I fought against, because I'm not a deficit. I refuse to accept that. I believe in being able to change and fix people if they need fixing. Especially people with disabilities. It's like and Skinner, C.F. Skinner. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this guy. Major determinist. Obviously, did all these experiments on rats and things like that. Really gave a bad name to determinists because he really essentially said that if you're already autistic, there's no saving you. If your brain is damaged, there's no saving you. You're screwed. Because that was a direct consequence of his deterministic philosophy of determinism, and when you say things like we shouldn't procreate, obviously this to bring a child into this world is terrible, it's unethical. Why would you do such a thing? It lends itself to that same vein of thought as Skinner espoused in his own work, which led a lot of academics to see that as giving up on folks who needed a lot of help and who needed us to provide services for them in the field of special education and disability studies. And that's why I came at this as somebody who's trained in disability studies and understands the history of disability, that this kind of sentiment was what led to a lot of the negative perspectives towards determinism amongst academia. And when I try to give a positive light to determinism, it just, it makes me, I hit a roadblock encountering your words, because I'm like, oh God, here we go. This is what they're talking about. How am I going to do good PR for determinism if this is what determinists think? If this is what they're thinking, it looks so pessimistic.
So I think you feel that you were being attacked in some way because you've had a child.
Not that I was being attacked per se. It was more just that I was more frustrated about reliving those sentiments that my old professors had about determinists and how pessimistic and how deficit based they are in their perspectives, and that's really what this is about.
Well, okay, I want to clarify a few things since you mentioned me in my post. Okay,
Right.
there are a few things that I think are happening here. First of
Right.
all, I may not be as good of a communicator as is Trick Slattery.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, you understand that I am a determinist and that I'm not literally blaming anyone as if they could have literally chosen to do otherwise. I understand that. But my posts express my frustration at the fact that people are doing these things that they are harmful, unethical, whatever we want to call them. So much suffering is caused by people not considering what they are doing.
Right.
Yeah, and so I don't want people to take my post as if it's attacking them or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, and another thing is I think that, this pessimism has nothing to do with whether somebody's a determinist or not. I think that I think it's more like my experience with humanity has led me to see that, yes, people can change. Yes, they can improve. But in my experience, it doesn't seem like it's happening fast enough. And so it does seem like non-procreating out of existence is the only solution.
Right. That's the thing. See, that's now, and I totally get the disappointment, 100%. But I think that I used to feel that way, and that's one little, I guess, bit of I don't know, I want to call it advice. I'd say maybe not to overstretch your bounds with your expectations of human beings to the point where you end up being too much of a perfectionist, such that it leads you to feel the way that you do, because that's ultimately what led me to feel similar sentiments when I was younger, and I helped myself and I helped calm myself by reminding myself, you know what, I'm expecting a little bit too much. I'm pushing too hard. And yes, while I have every reason to want things to change right away, I can't, it's unrealistic of me to get caught up in that, because it's not going to happen. Baby steps is what I have to just simply accept as the only way of handling it, is we have to take baby steps. While I would want to take leaps and bounds, that's not realistic. The world doesn't work that way. And if we keep on expecting that the world will work in leaps and bounds, that's where the danger zone is. And I think that's where, I would say, if my advice is just take a step back before you go into that world of, the frustration. It's not good for you. It's not healthy. All right. Because it stresses you out. It stressed me the hell out. That's for sure. When I used to think that way. And I just, I had to just accept it and learn to, accept it and maybe divert my attention to entertainment, which was there for me, my family, which was there for me, video games. I freaking love video games. I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm playing Final Fantasy Brave Exvius right now. I'm leveling up my Dark Fina to 6-star. These things, and I get to share this with my kid. I get to have fun. So these are the things that and believe me, when I turn on CNN, I don't want to hear about Trump. I really don't. I'm tired. I'm done. I have to deal with it at work. The guy is obviously a nut job, and I have coworkers that are really close friends of mine who voted for Trump. You think that that's easy to live with? Hell no, it's not. It's very painful. And my friends happen to have helped me a lot. One of my best friends, Dan, he's the store manager of the PC Richard & Son here in Greenville, New York. He's one of my best friends, and he's a Trump voter. But the guys helped me out with getting me a job, and I made a lot of money, and I'm able to provide for my family and stuff like that. So I'm in a big. Believe me, it's not easy to deal with that. That one of your best friends can't recognize the folly of his decision, and that's just where I have to say, you know what, nobody's perfect, and let me do my thing to lead by example, rather than trying to beat the guy over the head about his his inability to recognize the danger that is Trump.
Yes, so I agree with you, Daniel, that baby steps is the only way that things are going to ever change in the future. You really need baby steps, but sometimes just giving people a shot of reality, just give them the shock value or the shot of reality that helps promote these baby steps, even in the long run. But
I mean, does that make sense to you, Chandler, though? I mean, listen, I'm just trying to, serve as somebody, I guess, I don't know. I bring my experiences. I hope that they somehow raise consciousness about a certain aspect or something someone's going through or something somebody's battling against. And lend my own experience in those battles and hope that they kind of help to, soothe the soul, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm certainly glad you came on to discuss this, and I hope that we got this clarify what's going on here. But yeah, I mean, of course, obviously, I still agree with anti-natalism, and because I think it is perhaps more achievable for humans to non-procreate than it is for them to improve enough to make the world worth living into for the majority, even.
Okay, all right. That's something that I guess we can discuss. But
yeah,
that's more of a subject. But then I said in the beginning, I said that's more of a subjective position because we really have no evidence. That would require a full understanding of humans' full potential, and I don't think either one of us has that answer. So I can't really adopt that position for that reason alone.
That would be a different discussion because I'm not sure if I would fully adopt that position either. I am an anti-natalist, so I don't think that procreating or people not procreating
is more easily achievable. It's
very difficult to achieve that.
If one of my old professors said that, they'd be like, "You see the dangers of being a determinist." Well, I mean, and they would say that. I know that being determinist doesn't necessarily lead itself to being an anti-natalist. It's just that determinism obviously doesn't account for that thought from coming into being, and that doesn't make determinism look very good. And that's what I'm trying to do. Is I'm trying to show that determinism should positively impact all facets of our thought such that it doesn't lead us to such pessimism. That's my quandary with it, essentially, with this idea that anti-natalism is more easily achievable than positive change in the species. That's
right.
That's essentially my point.
My position is, never put all your eggs in the same basket.
Right.
You could be an anti-natalist, and understand the ethics of procreation and then the problems with procreation, and at the same time, you can understand that maybe it's not going to happen. That you're not going to get that mindset shift to happen, and work towards other objectives such as transhumanism and things like that, which will prevent suffering in other ways in the future. But
yeah, I think maybe that's more what I'm looking to debate is that idea. Actually, I think Chandler made it a little bit more focused now for me. Like that, I don't necessarily have a problem with anti-natalism. I think I have more problem that he thinks that that's more easily achievable than change.
Well, I think this was a good discussion, but I think we've clarified the problem, and
right.
I think we definitely see each other's positions a lot clearer now because right. At first I thought you were really anti-natalist.
I misphrased myself at the end of this whole thing. I kind of should have been like, I am anti-deficit-based perspective anti-natalism, which I think that Chandler ascribes to, because I do think that's more of a deficit-based perspective because it attacks the human, not the idea first. Because if you attack the idea first, you would say the idea of antinatalism is not easily achievable, but human progress is. But he's attacking the opposite. He's saying humans are not easily achievable to their own goodness, as is the idea of antinatalism. That's my issue.
Yeah, well, okay, Daniel. One thing I would like to say is that part of the reason that I'm rather pessimistic about humanity is because of the fact that I know that every child who is procreated, their parents are going to be indoctrinating them, for the most part, with the same dumb belief systems they have. They're going to be forcing their religion, their politics, their carnism, all of these things on them. And it's for that reason that I guess that's why I feel like progress is slow, because children are not allowed to grow up without negative influences. They can become a person who's, who thinks right.
Right. No, and you know what? I totally agree with you on that. I totally recognize that that's a problem, but I think that you're attributing that problem to more people than I think is the case. I think that, like in my case, for example, my wife is, again, she's Catholic. I'm an atheist. She doesn't impose, while she does expose him to the dogmas and the teachings of the church, and she takes them to church. I have no problem with that because I went to church too, and I didn't turn out to be a religious person. I actually, of my own cognition and volition, turned out to be an atheist. And I was once religious, I have to tell you, and it wasn't. But I was someone who questioned a lot of what I was being taught because a lot of it didn't make any sense. And I was lucky enough not to have people in my life that would make me question my own questions to the point where I would where those questions would be questioned away and pushed under the rug, such that I would be completely brainwashed or indoctrinated into the whole religious mode of thought. I was fortunate enough, okay? But my son, I don't think he's going to be a problem. And another thing that I recognize with my wife is that she operates very much like a determinist. She's not very dogmatic. She's not always calling, people, telling them, oh, they're going to go to hell for doing the bad things. She doesn't do that kind of stuff. So she taught me, actually, a lot of things that I didn't know before about theists. I never thought a theist couldn't be dogmatic, and she proved me wrong on that, and I changed, and she helped me to do that, surprisingly. There are very few people like her out there, for sure. I definitely would say that, but she is an anomaly, and I have to respect that if she exists, the possibility of change is there, because someone else, much like her, can also come to existence as well. But I can't apply that same degree of concern with the way that children are born into this world. I think we're making progress. I see that secularism is on the rise. I see the statistics are going more and more in our favor as time passes, and that's cause for hope.
Yeah, and one thing I would say is, suppose humanity does make great progress to where there's no more of these harmful religions and everybody's vegan and people are generally very happy. I still of course would be an anti-natalist because I still don't think that I can bring someone to existence without their consent. But I'll tell you one thing, I would not be as upset about others procreating because at least I would know those children would be less likely to suffer.
Yeah, and I respect that you're bringing in, but I noticed what you just did there. You're not bringing, you wouldn't want to bring a child into the world because you don't have their consent. You're really pushing, I think, for perfection in your ethics, and while that's commendable, I think it's a little extreme, only because regardless of how much you try to stay ultra consistent with those views, okay, no matter what happens in the universe, we don't know if your efforts wouldn't or would be futile, which is what I was telling Trick before, and that's why I think it's a little much. It's a little bit much in that sense. Like, for example, yes, let's say that everyone is a Chandler Klebs. Let's say that we just stop existing. Yes, and we've applied those perfect ethics that Chandler wants to apply, and believe me, they're commendable. I don't disrespect those ethics. I think they're very admirable, and it's great. The only problem is that's not how the world works. You cannot apply that perfect ethics and expect it to work, or even know that it would work. We don't know. So we're jumping on a leap of faith here, and that's the problem with your stance, is that what if, let's say, the theories of the universe going through a big crunch and a big bang over and over and over again, in each instance, drawing up the conditions for life to be here again, wouldn't lead us into the same point where we say, let's stop ourselves from procreating. And it's just an infinite loop. I'd
like to address that point
because
I mean that's kind of a different point. I mean, it's like saying, imagine you can prevent the suffering of 5 people, but you don't because you can't prevent the suffering of 100 people. It's like that. It's kind of mistaken thinking in my opinion. Like it's like saying, okay, so imagine the expansion and contraction. You have a certain amount of suffering during that expansion that takes place, but if you prevent it afterward, that is still that that space that doesn't have the suffering, and then you have the expansion or the contraction, and it expands and has that same amount. But you're still lessening the amount of suffering that exists.
You may be, yes, you may be, like Chandler may be, but the universe isn't. So in other words, as much as we want to be,
no, it's still less in the universe. It's still a less quantity of suffering that occurs on expansion. So
right, but it's not going to stop no matter what you do. That's my point. And I can't really, I embrace that. Okay, the difference between me and Chandler is that ultimately, I think I embrace that, and I say to myself that I'm going to have a kid. I'm going to procreate because you know what? This is the way the universe works. Let's work with it in its limits, in its imperfections, not give up on it. That's ultimately in the spirit.
But you can work with it without being unethical yourself. Like you can.
Well, can you really? Seriously, can you?
To a degree.
The only way that you'd be able to do that, I think, is just to end your own life, to kill yourself. This is where we go back.
It's like saying, I might as well kick that puppy because somewhere in the universe, puppies are going to get kicked anyway. It doesn't.
No, not quite. I would disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. This is different from kicking a puppy. If you're making the effort to avoid to make the world, if you're trying to put the effort in to make the world a better place, okay, you're not necessarily going to kick a puppy. So it doesn't make any sense. I wouldn't kick a puppy to make the world a better place.
And likewise, you don't want to create unnecessary suffering. And then that's the whole anti-natalist point is you're when you produce a child, you create this unnecessary suffering. You create this amount of suffering that is unnecessary because there's nothing that wants, desires, needs to come into existence to.
And my point again, on top of that is, yes, I agree, but that's the way the world is, my friend. You can't
I know.
change it.
But likewise,
you can subjectively decide to not have a kid, which is fine. I have no problem with that. Again, but at the same time, there are those of us who will think that we'll take it on. I believe in taking on what the universe puts before me, in all its imperfections.
But you don't take it. You don't take it on by making it worse. You take it on by trying to make it better.
Of course not. Right. Of course. Right.
So we're back.
I'm just saying what Chandler was saying is a little different than what you and I are discussing. Okay. He was saying, I ultimately would not reproduce because say your piece again, Chandler. I'm sorry. I'm looking forward to watching Game of Thrones, and I'm totally like losing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was just basically saying that I still think that there are so many reasons why I would not procreate. Because first of all, it would impose suffering on somebody potentially, and because they can't consent to it. And for me, that's
what you said. Okay, that's what I meant. The consent issue. Yeah, right. Like that's what I'm saying is that okay. So let's focus on that because it's a tough one. It's a tricky one. That one's very good. But I really feel like I have the reason why I think that's a problem. And again, I think I may have to write this out to kind of make it a little bit more clear because it's a very how do you say? Would you agree this is an under-discussed aspect of anti-natalism?
The consent argument is actually pretty big in the.
Yeah, it's big. I mean, that's.
It's one of the.
I've come across it, but I haven't really, meted out a good, solid response, and I think that takes a little bit of time. This is an idea. I'm not backing out. I'm not saying that I'm defeated here. I'm just saying that this idea needs a little bit of refining to express correctly.
It's definitely something that you can think about and get back to us and what your thoughts about it. But there is the issue of consent. Like when we invoke acting on a person, like doing something to a person, we usually say that you want to get their consent. But
here's something impromptu. I'm sorry to cut you off. I just got an impromptu thing that I just came up with. So consent. Again, the universe didn't allow for conditions for life to be procreated such that we could get consent. So really, I think that's, I guess, an angle I can take where I'm saying pretty much that, while I'm admitting that that's the way the universe works, I have to work with that. While I would want there to be a way to procreate where I can get consent, I gotta say it's a little bit weird, only because I didn't ask for consent to be here. But you know what? In many ways, I'm actually happy that I'm here.
Yeah,
and that's where. And
that's a lot of people. A lot of people are like that. A lot of people are happy, but some aren't. Some aren't.
I would say I would understand where those who aren't would have a quip with the idea of not getting consent for being here, but that is something that they have to reconcile in themselves. Because again, I was once at that point in my life where I felt that way, for sure. And I reconciled it because I admitted to myself that nobody's perfect. This is the way the world works, and I have to accept it. Otherwise, I'm never going to be able to enjoy my life. That's my point.
Yeah, but you don't. You say you have to accept it. That doesn't. I mean, you have to do it.
Well, because if I didn't accept
other
it, then
people,
I would.
well, you can accept that the universe, that procreation is going to happen. Obviously, you can accept that in the wild, it's crazy.
Right, but then think about what's going to happen if I don't accept it. I'm going to suffer because I'm going to be forever wallowing in that state of mind that says, you know what, I didn't have consent to be here. Fuck them. Fuck, my parents for bringing me into this world. That's not healthy for yourself, and that will lead you down a very dark and dreary path, dangerous path, even suicidal path.
So it's hard to talk about these type of things without invoking this idea that if you didn't get consent, then you can just blame people, and it's kind of the the free will mindset, right, that you're addressing there.
Correct.
Is this idea that and we're talking about something else. We're talking about something.
Is it really something else though? Is it really? I mean,
It's all about forward projection of what we do ethically, if possible. If we have the capability of doing something, it's just about projecting forward our best actions. Right.
But we shouldn't, get pissed off about the idea. I don't think. No. I think that I don't think we should get pissed off at the idea of not getting consent. I think that's a path towards a dark and dreary world. Yeah. I don't want to, go down the path. I've been there. Don't want to explore that path again. But that's my quip with Chandler's position on that respect. I think that yes, he can have that position if he wants, but that's his prerogative. Because at the end of the day, it's gonna make him really upset.
He's saying that people that ethically people should consider this consent issue.
Yeah, and say, but we can't. Yes, I know, but again, we can't. There's no. Again, like I said, I would definitely love if I could make Chandler happy and give him a world where you can make your choice whether you wanted to be here or not. Fuck yeah.
Well,
but you can't do that. The world doesn't work that way.
But some people can. Right?
Okay. Well, how? What do you mean? In which case can they?
Some people who are educated on certain topics can make the decision not to, because of the consent issue, because of the risk issue, because of the environment.
I'm talking about the consent of he's talking about the consent of the child, not the consent of adults involved in creating that child. I'm talking about he's saying that the fact that the child didn't give consent to be here in this world is like a forced way of being brought into the world, and that's not fair either.
He's saying that the fact that the child can't consent would be a reason for us not to procreate, not to impose a non-consented life onto somebody that can't make that consent. So it's about
but that would be impossible. That's like an impossibility of it's like you can't you couldn't logically do that even if you wanted to. There's no way of asking that child for their consent in the first place. There's no way.
That's the very problem. That's the problem.
But my point is, why should that be a problem?
Because
the child can't.
Because when you're injecting in a life that can be harmed, and the life can't consent on that, then it becomes an ethical issue. It's like saying.
But that's contingent upon the conditions that the child being born into being either very shitty conditions or very good conditions. that's another aspect of the problem here that I'm having with it.
It could be that they have good conditions in the beginning, but then they have a really horrible end of life or something like that.
You can say, but you can say, you know what, I'm going to have a kid. I'm not going to give him permission to choose whether or not he wants to be here. But shit, the world's a very great place. Why the hell wouldn't you want to be here? And then the kid's born. He's like, yeah, thank you, great. What's to avoid that from being a reality too? I mean, that's what I'm saying is that it seems like that's applied in all respects as if I think that would make sense if in all respects, in every instance, the time that the child would be brought into the world would always be a bad place. That's where I would say, you know what, Chandler, if that were the case, then I would say, you know what, you're right. But that's not the case. The world could be a great place and it could be fine, perfectly fine to do that. And I'd be okay with it.
It doesn't have to be a good place or a bad place.
Right.
Once you're talking about the asymmetry argument, then you're already saying that you're invoking some kind of harm that's going to come to this child, regardless of if they happen to have the good life or the bad life, that they can't consent to. You're invoking what's the word? Unnecessary harm. You're right. So you're imposing this unnecessary harm that this being can't consent to you doing that to them.
Right. And that's in the situation that the choices you're making are in such conditions that there would be, harm. But what's to say that in certain conditions there wouldn't be a necessary harm in order to gain a desired well-being?
Because we're talking from the state of non-existence where there's no valuer that values the obtainment of the positive.
You're speaking a priori, essentially. You're speaking axiomatically.
No.
Okay.
This is...
Actually, guys, I kind of have a response to this consent thing because now this consent issue is important in other areas where a person may exist. But let's suppose a person's unconscious. Let's suppose that a person does exist, but at the current moment they can't give consent because, say, they're in a coma. So then, now, suppose somebody, rapes somebody or puts a tattoo on them or takes some of their internal organs out while they're in a coma and can't give consent. And then after the person does wake up from the coma, then they become upset because somebody did something to them without their consent. I think that's something pretty serious that needs to be taken into consideration. And
Sure. But I don't think every aspect, every facet of every situation or scenario of consent is like the one you draw up. It could be a completely different scenario where it could be the complete opposite. Like I want my consent to do something that will benefit. I can't give my consent to do something that will benefit me. Okay, but you're still doing it anyway. And then when I wake up and something better that wasn't of my consent happened to me that helped me out, you're going to be damn sure I'm going to be thankful about it. So these are the scenarios you're drawing up are often limited to scenarios where it's always against the idea of consent, never for the idea of consent. Maybe there's instances or scenarios we could draw up where consent would have been where non-consent or doing something with somebody's non-consent could have been beneficial to them because they just didn't know better than the person doing the act upon them that they had no consent for in the first place. So that's the thing is that it's not we keep
The problem is there's a kind of a lack of knowledge of what's going to happen. So when you take the gamble, like say I stole $10,000 from you and I gambled it and I won $1 million and I split that with you, you'd probably be ecstatic, even though I stole that $10,000 that $10,000 from you.
Right. Sure.
But at the same time, I can steal that $10,000 from you and lose it all.
And you know what I would say? But for the first instance, yes, and I understand what you're saying. But you know what? Shit, I'm glad you got lucky, buddy. Thank you. You know what? We got very lucky. We're determinists anyway, so I guess I'll take it. I'm not going to be upset at you for it because you made it. If you did, I'll be upset, but not so much because at the end of the day, it's not your fault. You're an idiot enough not to know better to do that.
But the problem is I'm still doing something unethical. I'm stealing your $10,000 against. You're not consenting for me to do that.
And that's okay, because sometimes, like I said, unethical actions can lead to ethical results, and that's a known fact. Just like you described one such scenario, and we can't look at every single unethical thing. This is what I was talking about earlier. I said you can't look at every single unethical situation as an unethical one, because we don't know necessarily what will come of it, and that something positive couldn't come of it. This is where I think that we're kind of missing the point. I think that oftentimes we assume that, every ethical act is going to result in some sort of a terrible outcome. Every unethical act is not going to result in some sort of terrible outcome. It could very well result in a great outcome.
Right. That's possible, but what we're talking about right now is this consent issue. The consent issue is, if I steal your $10,000, you're not consenting to that.
Okay, let me try to frame it this way. Okay, so non-consent. Okay, listen. All right. I mean, I still don't. I'm not fully convinced, because there's still a problem, and I keep on going back to it. No unethical act, okay, is necessarily going to always end up being a truly terrible or having a truly terrible outcome. That's just not the case, okay?
Agreed.
So that's why I feel like the non-consent argument is a little bit wishy-washy, because it tries to paint every unethical act, or in order for it to really be a valid stance, you really have to somehow be able to paint every unethical act as giving rise to terrible consequences, and you can't do that. That's impossible.
But that's not what we're addressing here. Okay, so for the risk argument, that is what we're addressing. The risk argument and the asymmetry argument, there's always going to be some harm that comes in with existence. For the consent argument, we're addressing the fact that you are doing something not for yourself.
Right.
Not for yourself, not against yourself, not taking the chance on yourself, but on another person. So by me stealing your money, I'm playing with your welfare, not my own. Understand?
Right.
So that's something that you're not consenting with.
But you still decided to give me the money you won by virtue of your unethical choice. You're still giving me more money than what I had to begin with, even though you made the unethical decision.
If I won, or if I lost at all.
Now, if you won and you ran with it, then you'd be a real jerk, and that's when you'd be a real, that would be a real problem. But you drew the scenario that kind of,
right.
I think I should, had you just drawn that, I would have said exactly what you said from the beginning. But now we're going, to two different scenarios.
No, I'm talking about the two different scenarios are two different possibilities. We'll say.
Right.
So by me taking your money, I'm doing something unethical because you're not consenting to me taking your money, and I'm just stealing it from you. So I'm playing with your welfare, basically. Instead of my own welfare, I'm playing with your welfare.
Okay.
And then I'm only giving you half of what. Even if I win, I'm only giving you half. But
Right. So yeah, but you're still giving me half, which to me, I think it kind of waters down a lot of the merits of it being an unethical act, or how truly unethical is it really. It becomes more watered down because you're giving me more money, even though you made an unethical choice of taking my money without my consent to win more money. I mean, you probably, that's a tricky one, and I'm not really fully.
Yeah, because you wouldn't be saying that if you lost the money.
You know what I would be saying is that it could have very well been the case that he would have won the money. He just didn't know any better, and that's not his fault. So I can't be mad at him as a determinist. So You know what?
Yeah, I think we all agree with that. But
right. So that's my point. That's what I'm saying, is that's why it's not a very strong.
But when it comes to making ethical decisions, we understand that doing something without your consent for that affects your own welfare.
But we don't really. Yeah, but again, we don't really know if anything that I do without your consent wouldn't be better for you. We keep going in circles here, and I'm hoping that eventually I'll be able to get it across. I don't know how else to really explain it, but that's why I don't really ascribe to that kind of thinking. The very reason the statement I'm making right now is one of the very reasons I don't ascribe to that particular position about consent. I don't care if I give or don't or get consent, or give or don't get consent, whatever. It doesn't bother me, because at the end of the day, I don't know any better as a child. I have no knowledge of the world that my father or mother has, that I ought to be able to make that choice in the first place. And to be honest with you, I don't think that that's a very strong, convincing reason for me not to want to have a kid. It's just because I'm not able to give them the consent I'm not able to ask for their consent for them to be in the world. I mean, how do they know that the world wouldn't be great for them? How do I?
How do you know is the question.
Exactly. How do I know? Exactly. Right. I was just going to say that. How do I know too? But at the same time, that's the way the world. That's where I was going to go now. Like I've been going from the very beginning. That's the way the world is. It is imperfect. I have to accept it in all of its imperfections and just work to the best of my ability to make it better. So this way, we don't have concerns about whether or not we should be giving consent to children. That's before they're born. That's my point.
Would you say it was okay for you to go and steal somebody's money and gamble with it in hopes that you win?
I just wouldn't have confidence in taking such a risk. I wouldn't say that it's, I would just off that on that scenario, I would simply say I wouldn't do it personally only because the risk factor is too high.
Okay.
Now you can very well take that risk.
The risk argument is probably stronger for you than the consent argument.
Right. But okay. So even the risk argument is still problematic too, because even with risk, that all depends on the conditions that are in place. Like if the conditions were in place such that the slot machines would be able to give you a win of $10,000 for every 1,000 you put. I'm sorry, for every 9,000 or 10,000. I'm sorry. Okay, let me put it this way. Let's say that the slots were able to win you $10,000 for every, I don't know, $1,000 you put into it. That's a pretty decent turnaround. I mean, that's pretty good. I mean, I would take my chance at that. But if it's like, and I'm sorry, this is coming through as a bad analogy, and I know it is. Okay?
Well,
I'm just trying my best.
It only is
if I went through, go ahead.
Because when we're talking about procreation, there's actually a whole lot of risk it's
right. It's not akin to a slot machine. I get it. Listen, but that's just one. I'm just trying to make the point that we cannot assume or delve into this position without being mindful of the possibilities or the possible conditions there are, such that our disdain for having a child at any given point in time is something that we go through with. And that's my point, and I hope that makes sense. Essentially what I'm saying is that, the conditions could be there, and we can make it happen such that maybe through our future generations and through our teaching them to do the right things now, that the world would be better enough such that we don't have to be concerned about whether or not we give children consent. I think that concern is born of a very terrible condition that we're in right now. I think that that's ultimately what it is. And that's really the root cause of this sentiment. I really believe that's the root cause of the sentiment, because I don't feel like you can make a risk argument very easily to me.
Oh, really?
No, only because, again, that's all contingent on the conditions of the world at the time that we decide to have children. And yes, while I recognize that the world now is definitely not.
Let me give you one solid fact that's going to happen.
Okay.
You bring somebody into the world that they're going to have to endure their own death, correct?
Sure.
So this is something that is a fact. There's
right.
no. It's just one harm that you're creating when you create a new life.
Okay, but that's something I haven't accepted. Death and dying is something that we all have to accept in some way. I accepted it.
But you're doing it against somebody's consent. You're saying this person's not consenting to me forcing them to have to go through a dying process.
Right, and that's only because the laws are in place such that we can't all be like Dr. Kevorkian. Okay, you want to go there? Let's go to Dr. Kevorkian. I'm a strong supporter of Kevorkian. So what? Okay, great. So that kind of renders your argument very null if I tell you that, if the way to die was painless every time, your argument falls apart. It doesn't work. And especially since I'm a supporter of Kevorkian.
It's almost
no, it is, because Kevorkian's method was truly painless, and that's something that I would totally support and would want society to adopt that method instead of going through the grotesque method of someone dying in a bed of cancer with morphine. That's not doing anything for them, I'm sorry to tell you.
Yeah,
that person is suffering.
But
That's terrible.
Kevorkian's patients suffered greatly. That's the whole point of Kevorkian.
No, but what I'm trying to say is Kevorkian's methods can be used if we make the choice to die in a painless manner. That could address your concern about them dying painfully.
No, not just dying painfully. I'm talking about suffering enduring your own death.
That's given that the suffering. Okay, yeah, but you wouldn't have that
psychologically. Imagine the psychological suffering that those people had to endure.
There'd be no chance for any of that suffering to exist if the choice were made available for a person to implement Kevorkian's method of dying. That's my point, and then that's not a good, So let's say that I knew I was getting cancer. Let's say I'm going to, obviously somebody who goes through the fourth stage of cancer is suffering immensely. I wouldn't even let it get to that point just to prove a point to you. I would say, you know what, maybe Trick Slattery once said to me that I can, I should have asked consent, or I should have given my consent because I would suffer the death. And I'm like, you know what? Well, he's wrong because now I can choose to die painlessly. So where does that argument go? Does nothing for me. Next.
But when you say you can choose to, once you're dead, you're dead. But prior to
Mark
that,
Twain once said, I was dead 1,000 years before I got here. It didn't bother me one bit. And I've been under anesthesia too, so I know what death is like. Once you're under anesthesia, death is totally something not to be afraid of. It's really nothing. It's just non-existence.
It's not about death.
Right.
Like I said,
or
it's
suffering.
It's about the dying process or enduring your own
process. But that enduring wouldn't be an issue if we implemented Kevorkian's method. That's what I'm telling you.
Every Kevorkian patient endured their own dying
what I'm
process.
saying is that it doesn't need to be that way. You can choose to die of your own free will, of your own choice, right? I'm kidding. No, but you can make the decision to die, okay, in this way, so that you don't have to endure that suffering. If a doctor tells you you're terminally ill and you're going to suffer pain beyond what is worth you're going through, some people actually may choose to endure that pain. In fact, and there's some people who I have known have chosen to endure pain over their death and dying. What's to say about that? That's a whole other topic. But at the same time, to address your argument, it's not really an effective argument to me if society got to a point where the opportunity to kill yourself in a painless way to avoid suffering were there. To address your conundrum here.
Well, no,
that's my point.
My conundrum has more to do with the pain, but the psychological suffering of ending your own life. So when people are in existence, almost everybody, I mean, with a few exceptions, have some kind of psychological suffering when they know that they're about to die.
That's not applicable to me. I disagree with that. I mean, that yes, while most people that may be true. I don't know if there's any studies that have said. I don't. Maybe you know more about that, but that certainly does not apply to me. And in fact, I wouldn't allow it to apply to me simply to spite you. To be very honest.
Oh,
and
yeah,
and that would be a very easy thing to do, and that would, I would not, and that'd be totally valid. And if you ever wanted to hook me up to a polygraph to tell you, if I'm being honest about how I feel about that, you're more than welcome to, and I'd be able to show you.
All right, at end of life, I'm going to hook a microchip up to your brain so we can determine. No, I'm just kidding.
But you see, okay. But that's my thing is that yes, listen, that's a very clever one, but it didn't convince me. I agree. That's a good. It's definitely a strong argument.
That
but I don't
is
think
one aspect. That is one aspect of the risk, or that's not even the risk. That's a fact. And then the rest, you're risking cancer. You're risking rape. You're risking all of these horrible things that can happen.
But that's all contingent on whether or not we can make the change, okay? And that's where I decide to choose the path of being that agent of change. And that's something you have to reconcile. If you want to reconcile it, great. Just don't make it seem like I'm doing something terrible in the process. Oh, right. That's my only quip. And I said that before, and this is where we're going again. And I'm hoping that I think my path is more – I think it's not the easy way out, that's for sure. I think the path that Chandler ascribes to is more the easy way out. I take the hard way out because I like challenges. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. You can take that as you want, whatever way you want.
We're only addressing future actions, so that's right. All we're addressing. We're like I said, we're not trying to blame you for anything you've done in the past or anything like that. We've all I mean, like I said, no one's ethically perfect, right?
Right, but this whole thing about making, getting a child to, not because you're not getting, because the child's not giving consent to be in the world is unethical. I think that that's a problem. And it's tough for me that's something I have to focus on, I think, to really get clear in writing. And then especially I've tried to express it verbally.
Yeah. I think you have to think about that one.
It's fallen short. It's come short. Unfortunately, it's not an easy one to express.
I could say that when that's combined, especially with the asymmetry and the risk argument, then it's pretty strong. I can kind of see where you're like that. It's not probably the strongest argument. I mean, it's not from my perspective as a anti-natalist the strongest argument, but it still is. It's a good argument. That I mean, it is
a good argument, but I agree. It's a very good argument. I think it's well thought out. I think it was very clever in its construct. Who do we owe the credit to for this one? Who was the first one to conjure this argument?
I have no idea on the consent argument.
Oh, okay, all right, because whoever did that very clever.
It probably has a long history with an anti-natalist. So
sure,
anyway.
But I think that there's a problem with it, and I see it already. It's all contingent on the condition. Listen, at the end, that's essentially what I'm going to stick with. It's all contingent on the conditions of the way things are in any given point in time for that argument to really hold weight or hold no weight at all. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, but it's contingent on the environment that you can't be sure of in the future. So
right. But at the same time, neither can that person. Right, and neither can the person making that argument. That's my point. So it goes both ways. And if you think about it, it's like
it doesn't go both ways because the gamble argument. I mean, when you say you're gambling with somebody else's welfare,
it's 50-50.
I don't know if it's 50-50.
If you tally, yes, because if you tally it down, every single possible outcome for everything, it would be a 50-50 thing.
Even if it was like a 10% chance of a negative, it's still a risk that's unnecessarily taken.
Yeah,
that's the problem, and that's the problem with the asymmetry. So,
but the scenario you're drawing is just one of billions of scenarios. I mean, I could. It's not.
No, I said even if it's just a 10% chance of a horrible thing.
Right,
happening.
But it could be a 90% chance of something not happening. That's the thing is that
that's what I said.
If you normalize
that's what 10% chance means. So even if it's a 90% chance of someone having a good life, you're still taking that 10% chance.
Right, but that 10% chance could be. No, but that 10% chance could be 20, it could be 30, it could be 40, it could be 50. That's my point. We keep on going back to that thing.
The 10% of the negative.
Scenario.
The 10% of the negative.
Okay, but even the 10% of the positive, it doesn't matter. You can draw a scenario for either way.
I'm saying it could be a 95% positive and a 5% negative, but you're still taking that 5% chance unnecessarily.
But what I'm saying is that chance you're taking can be of a completely different scenario too. That's my point. Is that you can't you're making one scenario and you're forgetting there's many others that could totally be in favor of a positive life versus a negative.
Many others would be in the 95% chance, we'll say. So
we don't know that for sure, my friend. We really don't, and that's my point. Is that we're kind of going on faith on this whole idea of with respect to this particular aspect of the argument of anti-natalism, we're still ultimately faith-based. We're making. I think it's a problem, and I'm not going to make the same mistake that a lot of pantheists or agnostics make. And it seems like a very similar argument we're making here that a lot of theists make when trying to, prove or disprove the existence of a God. I mean, essentially, it's not. You can't. I'm going to simply work with what I have. Okay, and if the consequence is such that the child I bear into this world, had a choice or did not have a choice, is to me besides the point. Because ultimately you want to achieve a world where it doesn't have to be a matter of making a choice. You shouldn't have to be concerned with making a choice. The world should be something you're born into that you'd want to always say yes to. That's my point. And
that's a different. Like I agree with you. I mean, that's the whole transhumanism, transconsciousness.
But the possibility that possibility in and of itself is why I think that the consent argument is not convincing to me. So long if it was the case that the world was always going to be like this, no matter what, that would be a different thing. But we don't know if it's going to be that way, and we don't know if it's going to get better. So
we do know that there's a gamble, right? I mean, it's undeniable that there's a gamble, correct?
Yeah, but the gamble is, again, contingent. If you listen, it becomes a gamble if the variables are such that there's a chance of anything being the case. Okay, but maybe maybe there's a chance of it always being the case. And in that case, it's not going to be a gamble because you know with 100% certainty that it's always going to be good. But we don't know if we can hit or achieve or hit that 100% certainty that the world is going to be great, and we don't know if we can achieve that 100% certainty that the world is going to be complete and utter chaos. We don't know either way. Again, my point is
the problem is our epistemic uncertainty, our uncertainty of knowledge in this regards makes it so we have to take a risk to do that, but it's an unnecessary risk.
Right, but that's why the argument does not hold to me. That's the very reason it doesn't hold is because epistemically we're not certain, and I can't bank or hedge my bets on. What I can hedge my bets on is this: that obviously I see progress. I see that the change can happen. I see we can make things better. I see there's room for progress. It's just a matter of overcoming those obstacles to get us to that point, that transhumanist goal. And I think that given that possibility is there, I find that the consent argument is very wishy-washy. It's kind of weak.
All right. I think we can leave it. We can leave it there. I mean, obviously, I disagree. I mean, I think the risk argument is stronger than the consent argument, but I think the consent argument's still something. It's important that
I'm curious to see what everyone else thinks about this, though. It's a good debate. I think this is something we'll have to continue at some point. I want to definitely do my best to convey a little bit more. Yeah. Maybe on your end as well, you want to do your best to convey a little better to me, I'm sure. I feel we both feel this way,
Yeah, I'm sure we could go back and forth here. I mean, that's just the nature of these type of discussions. And
I appreciate your cordiality in this whole thing. You've been good.
All right, Chandler, I think it's time to close it up. What do you think?
Yeah, it's time for Game of Thrones. It's starting in 20 minutes, guys, so enjoy if you're a fan.
I mean, this is just a very good discussion, and it's fun listening to you guys as you go over these common anti-natalist arguments. And I mean, I still
Are they common? I'm surprised. I don't think I've anyone's ever brought up Kevorkian to you guys like that.
Oh no, the Kevorkian's brought up in the anti-natalist community.
Oh yeah, it is.
Most people are pro assisted suicide in the anti-natalist community.
That's okay. That's fine. Okay. I thought I was being original there.
Well, you would be surprised, Daniel, just the kind of conversations that I have seen in the anti-natalist Facebook groups and on the blogs all over the internet. There's some weird stuff out there. But yeah, and I feel that there are many more anti-natalist arguments that we haven't even mentioned today, because who has the time to mention everything? But thanks once again for joining us, Daniel. And you know that you're also welcome to join us on other topics that we do on here on most weekends.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
All right.
Okay. So hope everyone enjoyed listening to these guys go at it. I don't know if I have anything to add unless any of the people who've been listening in have something to say.
I'm curious if anyone wants to add anything. I'm just curious to hear what anyone wants to say about this topic.
I'll add something off air.
Okay, that sounds good. I guess that's it. WSD, anything?
Well, on my comics, you see my comics, yeah. That's pretty much my view on things.
All right, well, we'll look at your comments.
Yeah, he left a lot of comments in the Skype chat. So I guess that's it for now. So I hope somebody learns something from this. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.